In the last lesson, we brought in some foliage assets from Fab library and then we painted that foliage around these rocks and stones. Our scene is now almost ready, so let's discuss a few camera settings. Now, before we actually move on to the camera settings, one thing that I like to mention in here is that if for some reason you think I overlooked something or didn't explain something in as much detail, please do let me know and then I'll create a separate video for you and then I'll add that video in the course so that others can benefit from it as well. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, I'm gonna just select this character. I'm gonna make sure the sequencer is locked and I'm gonna copy this character and bring it here. Let me enlarge this window. I'm gonna bring this character maybe somewhere around here. And what I'm gonna do in here is to go into level sequence folder. I'm gonna create a new level sequence. This is just for the sake of demonstration. Of course, I'm gonna get rid of all of these once we are done with the camera settings, okay? So I'm just gonna type in ls_demo. I'm gonna open up this sequencer and I'm gonna drag this character, the skeletal mesh of the character, and bring it here. I'm gonna delete the transform parameter and add the animation. Yeah, I'm gonna select this character and move it just about there, okay? I'm gonna delete this keyframe and remove the transform parameter. I'm gonna lock the sequencer and let me save everything in here. And I'm gonna go into content browser. Let's go into content and yeah, okay. So I'm gonna adjust the view in here on this window and I'm gonna open this hamburger menu and let's create a new camera. I'm gonna split the window and let's open the view of this camera, okay? Let me just close this folder, close all these folders, and I'm gonna drag this camera and bring it inside this camera folder, okay? Yeah, so let me select this camera right here, move it like so, and bring it up on y-axis. And what I'm gonna do in here is to also hide the Minerva assets so that I get a little bit of extra frame rate, okay? So in this video, we're gonna discuss 4 different camera settings: the Filmback settings, the focal length, aperture, and squeeze factor, okay? And the reason for that is all these settings are somehow interlinked with each other. We're gonna also discuss other settings as well, but in the other videos of this section. So first up, I'm gonna select the camera that I just created in here and let's open some settings in here. Okay, so this is the Filmback settings that we're gonna discuss in this video. Next up, we're gonna discuss the focus settings, the focal length, the aperture, and finally the squeeze factor, okay? Yeah. So first of all, we have the Filmback settings in here. The Filmback settings are actually used to control the sensor width or sensor height of your camera. For example, if you're looking for something like this with your sensor, you can just tweak the sensor height in here. Or let's say if you're looking for a very wider field of view, you can increase your sensor width and have a very wide field of view if you want. We also have some presets in here as well. By default, it is set to 16:9 digital film. If you're looking for a wider field of view, what you can do is you can simply select 16:9 DSLR. And now, as you can see, we have a wider field of view. By field of view, I mean the distance from here to here. This is the horizontal field of view and this is the vertical field of view, okay? Yeah, so if I choose the default setting, you can see now we have a comparatively smaller field of view. But if I change this to, let's say, DSLR, now you can see we have a much wider field of view. If you're looking for something even wider, you can also use IMAX 70mm. Now you can see that we have an insanely wide field of view. Let's keep this setting at digital film for the sake of demonstration. Now for our first shot, we use the 70mm lens in here. But just for the sake of demonstration, to explain these camera settings, I'm just using a relatively smaller lens, okay? So this is how you can control your sensor width and sensor height of your camera. Next up, let's discuss focal length. So focal length is actually how far you want your lens to zoom into a particular subject. Right now, this character is a little bit further than this camera, And right now, as you can see, the mountains in the back are also just too far away from the camera. But if I increase the focal length in here, you're gonna see now the character and the rest of the scene is kind of zoomed into our camera, okay? We're gonna come back to discuss focal length in detail, but for now, that is all you need to know. Next up, I have aperture. Now, before we discuss aperture, we need to know how to focus on a particular subject. For example, I want to focus on this character. Right now, you can see this character is pretty much out of focus at this point. So let me just move my camera somewhere around here. And I can now focus on this character by tweaking this value, manual focus distance. For example, if I decrease this value, you can now see, I need you to focus in here, okay? You can now see by tweaking this value, I can focus on this particular character. If I increase this number, my character is going to go out of focus. But if I decrease this number, you're going to see that my character is now in focus, okay? You can actually take some help from this 2D focus plane. If I check this box, Unreal is going to show you a 2D focus plane, and you can simply just control this focus plane and place it over this character. And this is going to really allow you to accurately place your focus. And once you have set the focus of your scene, of your shot, you can simply just uncheck this box. And now, as you can see, our character is in focus and the rest of the scene or the mountains in the background are out of focus, okay? So one thing that I'd like you to know in here is that you can also, adjust your focus by using this pick tool. For example, you don't know where your focus actually is. It's somewhere way out here. You can simply just select this pick tool and select your character. And then, as you can see, it has adjusted the focus of your shot, okay? Let me uncheck this box, and that is pretty much it for now. Let's now move on to aperture. Now, to discuss aperture, I'm going to move this camera down on Z-axis. And let me change the focal length to, let's say, 50. And I'm going to move this camera maybe just about there, okay? Let me save everything. And I'm going to go into Fab, Megascans, Plants, Grass. And I'm going to bring in this grass asset and place it just about there. I'm going to move this thing on X and place it just about there, I guess. Okay. And then I'm going to select this asset. I'm going to create a duplicate copy, move this thing on X and place it just about there. I'm going to select this asset again, create a duplicate copy once again. This is just for the sake of demonstration, okay? And I'm going to move it just about there, maybe a little bit on Y. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm going to save everything and let's go back into content. Okay, let me select my camera. I'm going to enable this camera filter. If you don't know how to bring in these filters, you can simply just open this drop down menu and select different sort of filters from here. The camera filter is from here, okay? Yeah, so let me select this camera and let's now discuss what aperture actually is. Aperture is something that's going to allow us to control the depth of field of our shot. I know that I've mentioned depth of field a few times beforehand in the previous lessons. We have disabled or enabled depth of field a few times while placing different sort of assets. And from that, you may have this idea that depth of field is focus. Actually, the depth of field and focus both are different terms. Let me show you what they actually are. Okay, so you already know what focus is. It's the unblurred sort of area of your scene. For example, this area is out of focus. This one is out of focus as well, but this particular grass asset is in focus. So then what actually is depth of field and what is the difference? So the depth of field is actually the range of the area or that particular area that is in focus. Okay. For example, if you look in this shot, you can see this grass asset is in focus. But this one is pretty much out of focus and this one is out of focus as well. And everything else in the scene, the mountains in the back, the cliffs in the back, and this asset right here, all of them are out of focus. So the only area that is in focus ranges from somewhere around here, roughly behind the front foot of this character up till the back foot of this character. So this particular area in general, so roughly this particular area is in focus at this point. Okay, and that is depth of field. Depth of field is actually the area that is in focus. For example, let's say for instance that if we have this grass and this grass and this one as well, all three grass assets in focus, then in that particular case, the depth of field will be from here to here. So that is actually depth of field. Okay, so if I now select this camera and tweak the aperture value, let's say if I set this aperture value to 10, you're gonna see all of the sudden, all these three grass assets are now in focus. Both of his feet are in focus as well, and the only area that is out of focus is maybe somewhere around here, which is out of focus. For the most part, this area seems to be in focus from here to maybe here. Okay, this area seems to be in focus. Perhaps the out of focus area is only somewhere around here, and maybe the cliffs or the mountains or the valleys are out of focus at this point. Let me select the camera. Sorry. Okay, so by increasing this value, okay, yeah, I mistakenly reset the value. So if I set this to 10, you can now see that it has now increased the depth of field because now we have a particularly larger area that is in focus. Okay, but if I set this value back to 2.8, you're going to see that we have a very narrow depth of field in here. There is a very small area that is in focus right now. If I move my view from here, you can see these grass assets are not very far away from each other, but still somehow only the asset in the middle is in focus. This one and this one is completely out of focus. But let's say if I increase this to 5, or maybe let's say 7, now you can see that particularly I think this area is a little bit out of focus. The grass is now in focus. This one is in focus as well. This one is somehow in focus because it is a gradient or a ramp effect. So particularly, I think this area is now in focus. Everything else in the scene is out of focus. This one is out of focus as well. All these cliffs are out of focus as well at this point. So what is actually the main point in here? The main point in here is that you can control your depth of field by tweaking this aperture value. Okay, if you're looking for a very shallow or a very narrow depth of field, you can change this number to let's say 2.8. Now you can see we have a very narrow depth of field. But if you're looking for something that is a little bit wider, you're looking for a wider depth of field, depending on the shot, of course, you can increase this number to whatever you want, let's say 8. Now you can see that we have a very wide depth of field. Okay, let me show you another example. If I change this back to 2.8 and let me check this box and really nail this just about there maybe. I'm going to uncheck this box and I'm going to bring down the aperture. So yeah, now as you can see that, let me hide these grass assets. Okay, so let me select this camera, and right now as we can see that only his right foot, no, maybe I think I should bring it just about there. Maybe just about there. Okay, this looks good. So right now, as you can see that at aperture value of 1.2, you can see his back foot or the left foot is currently in focus. But the right foot or the front foot is out of focus at this point. But if I change this to, let's say, 5 or maybe 8, you can now see both of his feet are in focus. Let's say if I change this to 5, you can see this left foot is still in focus, but the right foot is not completely in focus, but somehow in focus at this point. But if I change this to 10, now it is completely out of focus. So what I want you to know in here is that it is a gradient effect, okay? So let me just unhide those grass assets. There we go. So I'm gonna now select this camera actor and I'm gonna come back to focal length. Now, one thing that I'd like you to know in here is that the aperture is not the only setting that you can use to control depth of field. Your focal length affects your depth of field as well. Let me demonstrate this. Now at this point, you can see the focal length is set to 50. You can see, let me check this box and bring this asset just about there. Okay. Now at this point, you can see the focal length is set to 50 and we have this asset in focus, this grass asset in focus, while the one in the back and the one in the front, both of them are out of focus, okay? But let's say if I change my focal length to maybe 25 or maybe 12 to make the difference noticeable, okay? You can now see all these three grass assets are now in focus, okay? Beforehand, only the one in the middle was in focus. The other two were out of focus. But when I change the focal length to 12, you can now see, now we have a much wider depth of field. The grass asset in the back is in focus as well. This asset is in focus as well. The one in the front is in focus as well. The area that is out of focus is maybe just about there. You can see this blurry sort of effect in here. Maybe somewhere around here. Maybe roughly ahead of this area, everything is in focus. And you can see your cliffs now somehow look in focus as well, but the mountains in the back are still out of focus. Okay. So the point in here is if you decrease your focal length, you're going to have a much wider field of view and you're going to have a much deeper depth of field as well. If I change this to, let's say, 50, you can now see we have a much narrow depth of field in here. Only the grass asset in the middle is in focus. This one is out of focus as well, and this one is out of focus as well. Okay. If I now hide these grass assets, I want you to look at the feet of this character. Let me hide all of them. I'm going to press H to hide. And now at this point, you can see at the focal length of 50, the depth of field is so narrow, it is so shallow that both of his feet are out of focus. If I change this to, let's say, 12, you can now see that both of his feet are in focus. So if you increase your focal length, you're gonna make your depth of field narrower. If you decrease your focal length, you're gonna make your depth of field wider, okay? So this is the relationship between focal length and depth of field. Now, one question that you may have in mind, if both of these parameters control depth of field, which one you should actually use to control your depth of field? Now, the answer to this question is pretty straightforward, okay? Let me just unhide these grass assets. There we go. Now, I'm going to quote two statements in here, and I really want you to focus on both of them. You can control your depth of field by using this aperture value, okay? And the second statement in here is, the focal length affects your depth of field. Now, the summary of both of these statements is that you're going to actually control your depth of field by tweaking this aperture value, but at the same time, the focal length also somehow affects your depth of field. So the general rule of thumb in here is to set a fixed focal length. For example, for this particular shot, I just want a focal length of 50. And let me adjust this position. There we go. So let's say that for this particular shot, I want a focal length of 50. And then I'm going to control my aperture to maybe somewhere around 3 or 4 or 5. Okay. So the general rule of thumb is, first, you just need to adjust the position of your camera, adjust the focal length, and then later on, you need to adjust your aperture to control the depth of field. Don't control your depth of field by using focal length. Yes, the focal length does have an effect on depth of field, but you need to control your depth of field by using this aperture value. Okay. One more thing that I like to mention in here is that this aperture value also affects the exposure of the scene. But right now, because this is set to auto exposure, that is why you don't see any changes with the exposure. We're going to discuss this further in the videos ahead, but for now, that is all you need to know. So up till now, we have discussed that how aperture and focal length affects your depth of field. But there is actually one more parameter that affects your depth of field as well. And that is your filmback settings. Let's say that you want to use the IMAX 70mm in here. But as you can see, if you use IMAX 70mm in here, you have a much wider field of view and your character barely pops out in your shot. It somehow seems like that this character is part of the background and not the main subject of this shot. So in order to make this character the main subject of the shot, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to increase the focal length. So for this one, maybe I'm going to have to increase the focal length to just about there. And once you increase your focal length, as I said earlier, your focal length affects your depth of field, okay? So this is the relationship between filmback settings, the focal length, and the aperture. The filmback doesn't directly affect your depth of field, But if you change your Filmback settings, you're going to have to also adjust the focal length, and it is the focal length that directly affects your depth of field. Okay, so this is the relationship between aperture, focal length, and Filmback settings. Of course, if you have a much bigger focal length in here, and if you're looking for a fairly deeper depth of field, you're going to have to adjust the aperture value. Okay, now before I end today's lesson, one more thing that I like to discuss in here is the squeeze factor. Okay, now if I increase the squeeze factor, what's going to happen is it's going to now give us a very wide field of view. Now when you increase the squeeze factor to 2, let me enlarge this window, and if I increase the squeeze factor, what actually happens is Unreal takes all of this extra part of the image that was cropped beforehand into account, and then it squeezes that image into this particular area, and then it stretches that image horizontally and gives you a very wide field of view. Okay, let me repeat this again. I'm going to bring down the squeeze factor. Now you already know that if you increase the squeeze factor, we have this extra bit of part of the image. Okay, so what actually happens is when you set the squeeze factor to 2, it takes all this extra bit of information, the one in here and the one in here, and then it squeezes that image into this particular area, and then it stretches that image horizontally, and then you get this very wide field of view. Okay, this is actually Unreal Engine's way of mimicking the anamorphic lenses. For example, if we set the squeeze factor to 1, at this point the opening of our lens is spherical. But if I increase the squeeze factor to 2, now we have the anamorphic opening or an ovular opening of this lens. Okay, so this is Unreal Engine's way of mimicking the anamorphic lenses. Anamorphic lenses come in really handy if you're looking for something very cinematic or wide field of view, especially for the landscapes and exteriors. Let me repeat this again. You can see that with squeeze factor 2, we have this extra bit of information on the right hand side and on the left hand side horizontally. But when we set the squeeze factor to 2, it takes all this information and then it squeezes that image into a smaller size. It squeezes that image into this particular field of view. And then what happens is it stretches that image horizontally, and then you get this wider field of view. Okay, please do let me know if you don't get this or somehow you need another example for this one, and I'll create another video for you, and then I'll add that video in the course as well, so that if others are having the same confusion, they can benefit from it as well. But this is the general idea behind the anamorphic lenses. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we're going to discuss that why we used let me open this shot and let me select the camera that I have for the shot that I'm going to use for my renders. So in the next lesson, we're going to discuss that why we use these particular settings for this particular shot, because in the previous lessons, I said that you need to follow along the video and just tweak these settings, and I'll explain them later. So in the next video, I'm going to show you why I tweak these settings for this particular shot so that you have a much better idea of how to capture a very cinematic looking shot. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you guys in the next one.